And hello. Cheers to everyone. It is about noon my time, late evening in Europe, so greetings to everyone. Okay, I have a call coming up, so I have 45 minutes to get this done. So we have a hard deadline. Okay, number one, Areopa webinars hosted by Luke Van Vliet. If you are not subscribed to their YouTube channel, check them out. Luke interviews various people in the Business Central community who demonstrate or discuss, usually I think technical topics, but wide range of topics. And recently he interviewed Dmitry Katzin, who played with GitHub Copilot in order to see if it could help write Business Central AL extensions. And if you're not familiar with GitHub Copilot, it's kind of like an autocomplete with some AI or ML in there so that as you type, it starts to complete sentences or it fills in blocks of code. And the challenge is if it were, say, JavaScript or C# or Python or something like that, there are quite a few repositories out there that it can pull on, but AL doesn't have quite the breadth of public repositories and data available for training. However, Dmitry was apparently able to get it work in a reasonable fashion and thereby saving a lot of time. So check out the Areopa webinar with Dmitry. I think he had a technical issue with one of his VMs, but I think they worked through it. And sounds very interesting. And GitHub Copilot and the new OpenAI stuff like ChatGPT. It's shaping up to be a very strange time where we kind of transition to helper tools or automated tools. I don't know what it's going to look like, but interesting perspective. Go check that out. A change that was introduced in Business Central recently is what is called the Modern Action Bar. And this is kind of a redesign and reorganization of the action bar at the top of the Business Central pages to help make things easier to find, to reorganize things, and also allow a user to reposition things or add things at the top of the page. And pros and cons to this. More accessible actions, that's good. Clean up duplicate actions, that's good. Developers can more easily surface certain actions, that's good. However, we looked at this internally for our Business Central AppSource app, and ours looked exactly the same. So we need to look into, okay, do we need to do something to use this modern version of the action bar to surface things differently? And do we need to consider how we expose things on the action bar? Think about that a little more in a different manner. And then the one concern I have is if a user is able to rearrange this, add, remove stuff to the action bar, it's going to produce some interesting support conversations because a Business Central consultant might say, oh, you just go to the action bar, you click this, this, and this. And the user says, I don't have that. What are you talking about? And then you're going to have a call to figure out, okay, where did it go? Did it get pulled off? Is it buried under options that the user added? Not sure. So pros and cons, but it looks like a nice improvement over the old action bar, which could get very confusing. I am constantly navigating actions to figure out where something is, and it's in two places, so it got pretty confusing. Next up, Azure Functions. We happen to use Azure Functions internally. If you also use Azure Functions, this is an interesting one, which I am ambivalent about, and it is an enhancement to Azure SQL. I called it Azure Functions, but it's Azure SQL and Azure Functions combined. And the idea is that Azure SQL now has the ability to call any REST service from Azure SQL. Let me just fix that because this should say Azure SQL. Okay. And so Azure SQL can now call REST services such as Azure Functions, Power BI, Event Hub, and more. I'm ambivalent about this because having SQL Server, which is essentially what Azure SQL is, call web services, someone might say, wow, that's so cool. That's going to save me a bunch of time. Maybe, but was SQL Server designed to make web service calls outbound and then get a payload inbound and potentially deal with that? And I liken this to the ability that was introduced many years ago for SQL Server to call .NET. And that's a feature you need to enable in SQL Server. And then you can call .NET. You can kind of add this pseudo .NET code embedded in your stored procedures. I never used it because I was like, this is just not a great idea. I can kind of understand 10 people around a table or 5 people around a table one night thinking, wow, wouldn't it be cool if? I don't think it was heavily adopted. I don't think it was widely used. I don't think it was a great idea. Just so many implications of doing that. So what do you think about this? Having Azure SQL be able to call any REST service. I can understand you could list 20 different use cases where this would be handy, where this would save you time, where it'd be convenient. But long-term strategically, security-wise, control-wise, code management-wise, debugging-wise, is it a prudent feature function? And can it be disabled? I'll need to look into this. Can I go into Azure SQL and say, no, do not allow calls to REST service? Does it need to be enabled to be active? I don't know. I'm not too keen on it personally, but that's just me. I'm old school. BC performance. So I saw this tweet from Kenny. He just had a call with a partner to discuss performance, and the partner did not know about the article, How to Work with a Performance Problem in Docs. And so check this out. Just be aware of it. You don't necessarily need to know all the steps, but be aware that there are MS Docs pages on troubleshooting performance problems in Business Central. I don't think it's just on-prem. I think it does also include some recommendations for BC SaaS or BC Online. So check that out. And I happened to know about this, and then I was reminded about it when I was working with someone to submit sessions for Dynamics Con Live 2023. And so friend Cecile Din, she and I were talking about what sessions to present, and she found a bunch of articles on Business Central Online performance troubleshooting and diagnostics. And so she proposed a session, Tools to Troubleshoot Business Central Performance. So we've submitted that. I think it's an interesting topic. It's kind of on the edge, on the periphery. It's not like a core payables, financials, type of topic, but I think it's interesting. And one of the criteria is, would I learn something preparing it? I'd learn a ton because I'm vaguely familiar with it, but lots of tools and resources available on that topic that I'd love to learn about. Another session we submitted was top tips for Business Central Online Administration. And that was based off of this book by Andre Baladin. And it is Administrating Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central Online. So not just on-prem, it is focused on online. And it is a really hands-on practical book of how to jump in and just start administrating BC. Do this, go here, click on this, check this out, be aware of this feature, you can do this. So I've read a couple chapters and I understand most of the topics, but seeing the instructions is kind of handy. So definitely check out the book and we'll see if that session rises to the top of being worthy for presentation at the conference. And then another thing is something I've actually proposed before. I can't remember if I've actually presented on it, but a presentation on Business Central configuration packages. And I believe this is a popular topic among people who are coming from other systems, particularly Dynamics GP, because in the Dynamics GP world, we generally had to use a tool, some type of integration tool to get data into or out of Dynamics GP, primarily into. And the feature configuration packages in Business Central Online is a pretty big deal for us in that it's out of the box, highly capable, can do amazing things if you do it properly and if you're careful and know what you're doing and don't make any mistakes that deletes all your data, right? Usual caveats apply, but powerful tool that those of us from the GP world find interesting. So DynamicsCon Live 2023, I believe you can buy some early bird tickets coming up. That is going to be in Scottsdale, Arizona in May. While checking out the Administrating Dynamics 365 book and preparing some content for that BC admin session topic, I was reminded of the Create Database Export feature in Business Central Admin Center for Business Central Online. And I was like, okay, I was aware of it when it first got released. A lot of people were saying, well, if I'm going to the cloud, I'm going to want to be able to download my data. You know, there was that concern. So they addressed it very quickly and allowed you to download this thing called a backpack file. However, I hadn't really heard much about it and whether anyone was using it or, you know, it got checked off the to-do list, but does anyone actually use it for anything? There was this demand for it years ago, but what's the status now? So I asked on Twitter, like, what are the real world use cases for this feature? And I got some interesting feedback, which was helpful. So Jeremy pointed out that in some regions or countries, there may be a compliance requirement where you need to have the ability to download data and have a copy in your region or in your country so that you control it and you're not at risk of, say, some geopolitical thing or data center issue that blocks access to your data. So that was kind of interesting. I don't know what countries or regions that might be. If anyone knows, ping me and let me know. Eric Hogard says, we have customers who are using it to get copies of their production data into Docker for testing. And he has a video of that on his YouTube channel. So that makes sense. So if you're going to test certain modifications, customizations, ISVs, whatever, you want to do that on a Docker container. Being able to download your production data from SaaS, pull it into Docker for testing. Obviously, you need to have some technical expertise to have those Docker containers set up, but it's an option. Peter says, if you need it for a Business Central exit strategy for accessing cloud data. And I got several comments about this that some people have gone from Business Central Online to Business Central On-Prem for various reasons. So that seems to be a theme of how this is actually used, which is interesting. Tara says, we export backups monthly just in case. Sometimes we use the backups to create Docker containers. So, yep, makes sense. Just in case, having a local backup. And if you don't use it, no big deal. I don't know if there's a way to automate it through the admin API. Perhaps this book is going to tell me. There's an entire chapter on the admin API that I haven't gotten to yet. But if it can be automated, that would be kind of cool if you could pull down those backpacks and store them on a SAN, on OneDrive, SharePoint, blob storage, whatever. Stefano says migrations from SaaS to on-prem. There we go again. And sometimes it's performance, whatever the issue, going from SaaS to on-prem could be cost. Maybe they're using too much capacity. It's getting too expensive for SaaS. They're going on-prem. And Roberto has an interesting one. In my case, I used it to export a database and import it into a new tenant because the company that was using Business Central was sold to another entity. So interestingly, it looks like the acquiring entity used Business Central, so they're able to export from one entity, import into another entity, and going from Business Central Online to Business Central Online or Online On-Prem, whatever the case was, from one BC tenant to another BC tenant. I thought that was a really interesting scenario. Probably doesn't happen often, but very interesting. Wouldn't have thought of that. Azure DevOps Simplify. I have not yet had a chance to look at this and see how it works or watch a video, but Tobias Fenster and David Feldhoff have worked together to create this VS Code extension that helps you work with Azure DevOps from within VS Code more efficiently. And this is interesting because I spoke with Tobias briefly at Directions of Mia when he presented on the various DevOps pipeline management tools with Waldo and Freddie. And one of the interesting things that I saw in that overall session was the ability to expose DevOps type pipelines and activities in VS Code. For instance, ALGo for GitHub, I believe you can see through a plugin, a VS Code extension, you can actually kind of manage your pipelines and see activity and see the pipeline runs, which I use Azure DevOps pipelines, and I'm not aware how to do that. Maybe there's a way. We haven't looked into it. But since I saw that session, I was like, ooh, that looks like it would save me time. Instead of going from VS Code to Azure DevOps in a web page and back and forth and doing testing and fixes, if we could do that all within VS Code, it just saves time. Not a huge life-changing difference, but 5 or 10 minutes there with every pipeline kind of adds up and would be kind of nice. So on my to-do list, Azure DevOps Simplify VS Code extension. Check it out. Next up, Stefano has a cool demo of using Grafana, a Grafana dashboard for Business Central online monitoring. And I think it's pulling Azure App Insights telemetry is my guess. I have not had a chance to dig into this either, but I saw it. And the reason it caught my eye is because Grafana is a popular tool for use in the InfoSec community or the security community. And so you may use, you may use a SIM or SIEM tool for log collection, such as Graylog. And Graylog can do some analysis, some statistics, and a basic dashboard, but it's not really an advanced dashboard tool. So a lot of people then go Graylog to Grafana in order to have a really rich visual dashboard of activity that is being collected through telemetry in Graylog, for instance. And so it looks like Stefano figured out how to take Business Central App Insights telemetry and have Azure, there's an Azure Grafana service apparently, which I didn't even know about. Makes sense. So Azure Grafana can take a look at your Business Central telemetry data and pull together a nice dashboard. So super cool. And two challenges. Like one is if you start using App Insights, you realize there is just this huge pile of data, and that alone is non-human consumable. You have to aggregate it. Now, Kenny has posted reports. There's a whole Power BI report pack that he has created to help you analyze it. And he gives you metrics and surfaces potential hotspots or problem areas, or lets you monitor certain telemetry metrics. But that involves the Power BI report, and maybe there's some analysis or graphic that you want to surface that's not there. Grafana might be another way of doing that. Maybe you just have a dashboard this is a little simpler or something more accessible, more visually quick to assess what's going on. So very cool. I'd love to check it out. If I have time, I'll try to find time. I'd love to use Grafana with my Graylog SIM implementation for my security logging. And it would be great to know it so that I can then just roll that right into Business Central App Insights analysis, like what Stefano has done. So really cool stuff. And this is just mind-blowing coming from the on-prem Dynamics GP world. To have this type of dashboard of the system performance is just crazy. So really cool things happening very quickly. Recently, we updated our AppSource app, and we ran into this issue because I wanted to, if say a license was expired and an error occurred, I wanted in the error dialog to say, hey, looks like this error has occurred. Please contact us at support@mycompany.com, or your license has expired. Please contact us at sales, and we'd have an email address. Well, when we first tried this and had the email address hard-coded in a text variable to display in the dialog, we ran into code cop warning AA0240. And this is a Business Central AL code cop warning that says email and phone number must not be present in any part of the source code. Must not. It is a commandment. Thou shalt not violate this rule. Email and phone number must not be present in any part of the source code that might be collected as telemetry data. And I get it. It's the whole GDPR data privacy thing, but this isn't a customer email address. This isn't a customer phone number. This is ours, and it's for our product. It's for our software. And we want a customer to be able to contact us. Like, I don't care if it gets collected in telemetry. In this case, it's totally innocuous. Now, a couple recommendations. Other people have run into this. We aren't the first one, thankfully. And Morton recommended Pragma warning disable AA0240 around the label. So you can disable this code cop rule in that section of the code. That's one option. Or the other question I had was, should I be storing this somewhere else in a config file, a settings, a parameter somewhere outside of the source code? And our understanding, there's no great way to do that in AL projects. It's not like .NET where we have a config file that we can easily change. So he does say, well, you could get it from a JSON object in blob storage. And yeah, we could have our code reach out, but if our app is having a problem, I don't know if it might also have a problem reaching out to our blob storage, right? So I want to keep things as simple as possible. And I don't think our support email is going to change anytime soon. So I'm leaning towards just disabling this code cop. And Lars confirmed, yeah, we also just disabled the warning around the label. Now, we did find that if you use the subst str no, I think is the function in Business Central, you can substitute in your email address in the actual dialog label or the string variable, and it does not trigger the AA0240 error. So that's what we've done for the time being, because we didn't know about the Pragma disable option, but for now we use the, I think it's subst no, and that swaps in our email address for the %1 parameter in the label. So that works. You don't get the warning, and your pipelines will run without warning without having to disable that rule at all. So that was our trick. Don't know if that's good or bad, but we can always revisit it if we need to in the future. Okay, another one we ran into updating our app source app for v21, and that is the test permissions bug. That's what I'm going to call it because that's what it seems to be. And what happens is if you try to run your pipeline on v21, you're going to get this error, something equivalent of, sorry, the current permissions prevented the action. So we couldn't read from our table or insert from our own tables. It was very strange. We were puzzled, wondering what's going on. Through various Google searches, I found this post from Waldo from October 19th, so relatively recent, which makes sense. And so he references this error with that screenshot, and Christoph helpfully adds test permissions disabled. That seems to be the fix for now. But I thought I saw a reply or a tweet from Luke saying, well, this is a known issue as discussed on Yammer a month ago. It's like, well, okay, which is a different topic, which I'll get into. It's like, okay, so I had to go to Yammer to figure out what's going on. And long thread, I couldn't follow it, but ultimately someone's like, well, what is the solution in this scenario? And it looks like they finally acknowledged that this might be not behaving in a desired manner. And so they are apparently considering this a bug, and they're looking to improve it. But it's a little more involved than they thought it looks like. So that was as of November 17th. I don't know the current status, but as far as I know, this is still an open issue, and the fix that we used is test permission equals disabled. I don't know if it's a good idea, bad idea, if there are better options. I saw a couple proposals of changing permissions, but this was one line, test permission disabled, worked fine for us. So, okay, so related to trying to figure out and remember this, I probably saw this post from Waldo, but it didn't register And only once I ran into it did I go back and say, obviously I'm not the only one who's had this issue. And a bunch of other people had this issue, but how would I have known? Like, we're juggling 100 things like this. So how do you keep up with Business Central? And I was on a podcast recently where we kind of discussed this, like, how are you expected to keep up with all of this stuff? And my argument is Microsoft is moving very rapidly, faster than I can keep up, faster than many consultants or developers can keep up, and certainly faster than most customers. While that, in a sense, is a good thing, there's a challenge in managing that. So how do you keep up with BC? My primary source is Twitter. And if I run into a problem like this error, I kind of resort to Google. I just Google it, hope someone, I don't know that Yammer gets indexed much, but maybe there's a blog or a forum post. Or maybe you follow some coffee guy on YouTube or Twitter that talks about this stuff. But like, it's tough, very difficult to keep up with this stuff. So, relating to keep up with stuff and learning and having to do stuff, I'm having just an internal conversation on various topics about DIY. And should you do things yourself? Excuse me. So, to DIY or not DIY. I resisted espresso for a long time because I didn't want to deal with it. If I'm having one cup of one latte a day, like, is it worth it? These things are expensive. These espresso machines are like, maybe you can get a cheap one for $300 or $400 that just does the espresso, and you've got to do everything else manual, in which case you need a grinder and a tamper and all this other stuff, right? Or you get something like this. These are, I don't know, $600 and to $1,000 for the consumer ones, and the nicer ones, thousands of dollars, right? To make a cup of coffee, it's kind of crazy. But the coffee shop by me that I was going to, I enjoyed going to, is great. But they're charging $7 for a latte now. Like, inflation is kind of crazy. I'm like, well, $7 for a latte, let's say you get a $700 machine, that's 100 lattes. You could probably easily pull that off in 1 year. So start to get an ROI. And the interesting side effect that I didn't really consider is that these lattes taste completely different than any other coffee shop latte I've had. Now, I can't say whether that's good or bad, but I happen to, fortunately, enjoy them. Like, wow, this is really good. This is a flavor I've never had this much flavor from a latte from a Starbucks or a coffee shop. Like, it tastes like a latte, but the lattes I'm making at home, like, whoa, there's a lot more going on here. And I don't know the chemistry. I don't know why. I don't know if I'm using more espresso or what, but very, very different flavor that I'm sipping one right now that I've just never experienced before. So besides long-term saving money potentially, right, theoretically on this, there's some interesting benefits. And a friend in India taught me how to make chai, like authentic Indian chai. It's like, do this, this, and this. I'm like, okay. I went down to Little India, just a mile away from me, 2 miles away from me in Southern California. And I picked up some authentic Tata premium Indian tea. And this is loose black tea, but unlike anything you would buy from an American tea store or a grocery store, this tea is in these kind of strange little granule looking things. And you just put a couple teaspoons of this in, cup of water, cup of milk, you boil it on the stove, and you've got instant amazing chai. It's like, whoa. And I'm sure I could go get chai from a coffee shop, but at home, the DIY, it is fantastic. I highly recommend it. A bunch of YouTube videos on how to make authentic Indian chai at home. Super simple, super cheap, and it is amazing. So I was like, wow, really eye-opening when you'd start doing things yourself. And anyone who follows me knows I am kind of a computer security, information security geek. And I've just found that like the vendors I use for my antivirus support, my firewall support, like I can send a request to them and they'll try to figure it out or they'll escalate it to my firewall vendor. But I think I've learned I cannot rely upon them for comprehensive IT security, even for my little home office. And so I'm kind of embarking on this DIY learn information security, and I've learned a lot. I'm by no means an expert, but just knowing a little bit, it's really amazing kind of the universe that opens up when you start to do a little bit of DIY. I don't need to be an expert, but I can now say, well, what about this? And start to ask some semi-informed, intelligent questions. So this happens to be a screenshot of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And this is a framework and, sorry, I'm getting live stream spam. And it is a huge framework for information security that helps you understand attack vectors for pen testing and red teaming and understanding, okay, here's the attack scenario and here's the possible defense scenarios. And it's kind of a framework to help you think about information security so that it's like not just this giant pile of stuff that's unmanageable. It's like, okay, here are your categories: reconnaissance, resources, initial access, execution, and it goes through the timeline of an attack such that you can kind of have a framework appropriately for thinking about how do I work on, learn, implement information security in my organization. So it's like, the DIY approach really just opens your mind for how to organize this information. And on the BC front, Luke Van Vliet has a book, Automated Testing. And yeah, I could outsource that or find someone to do it, but by reading a book, learning about it, implementing it, we're doing it ourselves. And it's really helpful to be able to do that yourself. Same with administering Business Central Online. It's like, oh, okay, that's not too hard. And I'll get to a point later. I'm playing with some LED lighting. It's like, okay, I didn't know much about it, but now I understand how to do 24-volt LED strip lighting with these power supplies and with a kind of commercial grade Wi-Fi controller. It's like, okay, baby steps. And it's like, oh, you mean I don't have to pay someone $2,000 to just put some under cabinet lighting in my kitchen? This costs, $200 maybe to do my kitchen and make it look great. That's kind of cool. So when you DIY, it's not too hard oftentimes. And then you've seen some of my tweets potentially on car maintenance. This at the far left there, that is a Toyota Prius. That is the internal high voltage battery used by a Prius. And I watched a YouTube video that said, in terms of the Prius battery, one of the number one issues is that the filter and the air vent for the fan that cools this battery gets clogged. It's not highlighted by the car. The car doesn't tell you, and the dealer doesn't tell you. When you go in for an oil change, this is never mentioned. You have to clean this filter, this vent, in order to get good air circulation on this Prius hybrid battery. Otherwise, the battery overheats, gets hot, you'll get warnings. You can pay the dealer $150 to clean this vent for you. But essentially, it's a semi-user accessible thing. It's kind of a pain to do, but it's not hard. But it's DIY, and it prolongs. A Toyota mechanic on YouTube is saying this is the number one reason that Prius batteries start to fail early is they overheat due to this issue. So we're going to do it ourselves. Very simple to do. And the same guy taught me how to clean the throttle body on my 4Runner. Super simple. Like the first time you do it, it takes a little bit to figure out, but it's a 10-minute operation that saves me $150, whatever, $200 at a dealer. And it's just cleaning a piece of metal, literally wiping some carbon off the inside of an aluminum tube. Not hard at all. So I can now do that and save that time and money. And watched a few more videos that involved a grease gun and synthetic grease. And this weekend, I connected it, got under my car, and lubricated the propeller shaft, whatever they call that. It's basically the drive shaft, and saved $150, $250. I don't even know what they charge for this. Super easy to do. Takes maybe 20 minutes, including futzing around. So lots of opportunities for DIY. And lastly, my cybersecurity intern, my 12-year-old cybersecurity intern, replaced all of the batteries on my APC UPSs. So we had 4 batteries in my office. She replaced them all. Super easy. Now she knows how to do it. You just pull the battery out, plug it back in, reset the date, and you're good to go. Saves a lot of time and money to do it yourself. So with that diatribe, what are some opportunities for you internally, if you're a partner ISV, to do DIY? What are opportunities for customers to do DIY? Like, are there simple things that they could be doing to save them time and money and not have to call you? Could they manage their own licenses, right? Buying a license, assigning it to a user in the D365 Admin Center. Maybe they can manage users or permissions in BC. Maybe they could do a simple page modification. I know that's controversial. Or maybe they could use, if they have multiple, you have them use Simple Object Designer from Eric, and maybe that is a way that they can manage it without requiring a customization for every single field they want to add to a page. And I was just on a call where we were talking about report modifications, and it's kind of a hassle. It's like, well, I want to add this one field to the report. We check the data source. The field's apparently not there. Okay, so how do we deal with this? I don't know that a customer can do the custom AL and RDLC report layout modifications. So do they need an ISV reporting tool like Quadira, which I recently got a demo of? And it's like, I don't know, like what's the best answer for that? And pros and cons, right? There's kind of potentially a one-time cost to have this customization developed, and you're not paying forever for a monthly subscription. Or if they've got a bunch of reports they need to modify, maybe the ISV solution is cheaper and easier long-term. Excuse me. And then testing and installing ISV solutions. Is that something the partner should do? Or could that be handed off to the customer to do in their sandbox? And lastly, Teams integration. Just saw a neat 5-minute demo of the new integrations that Teams has, and looks pretty impressive. So could that be given to a customer to DIY and add value to their organization? Just kind of trying to think of ideas here that customers, simple things customers or even partners could do for themselves rather than outsourcing it. Just like I'm now cleaning my throttle body and jeez. Okay. It's a sign. The cough is telling me to wrap this thing up. So anyway, DIY, it's just on my mind, trying to think about it. And I will conclude with these fun customer quotes. This has happened to me multiple times. I'm on a call with a customer. This is on-prem stuff for Dynamics GP. And I say, okay, let's connect to the server where this application is installed. And they all virtually look at each other on this Zoom meeting or whatever. And then someone says, we don't know which server it's installed on. And they literally don't. They have no idea which server it's installed on, how to connect to it. And after contacting 3 people, they finally find the one person who knows where this is located. And it seems to becoming a more common problem with my customer calls for on-prem. They have so many VMs, so many virtual servers going on. It's like, it's just an IP address or random name. And 6 months later, they don't remember where something is installed or where a process is running. And it becomes this, this hunt to find which server is causing which problem. So very interesting that I'm running into that regularly. I recently had a call talking relative to complexity, and the customer says, we're having this problem. I said, okay, in order to solve that the right way, here's what you want to do. You want to change the way you're doing this. So instead of doing this every day, you just change it to a wildcard value so you're not having to change this value every day. They said, well, I understand what you're saying, but instead of making that one change you're recommending, Can we instead write a scheduled task or a job that calls a macro that changes this value, and then write another scheduled task that stops the Windows service, and then write a third scheduled task that starts the Windows service? And it was like this crazy pile of scheduled tasks and jobs to accomplish the exact same thing that I was recommending with one simple change. It was wild. And they were really lobbying for their more complex solution. And I finally had to say, no, I'm sorry. That is a really bad idea. I'm not going to support it. You can try it, but I'm not going to have anything to do with it. You're going to have reliability issues. And finally, they started to come around and stop fighting it. And it was just a very strange mindset to experience, that instead of doing one simple thing that would require them to make a change to another system or process or whatever they're doing, rather than deal with organizational change and process change to completely solve their problem, they were willing to implement more and more and more complexity that they would have to maintain on an ongoing basis that was much more fragile. That's the direction they went. I was like, oh, help, please. Another one was, had a call with a customer. They say, yeah, we need to get this data into Business Central. Can you call the API of our payroll SaaS platform in order to import this employee time data into Business Central jobs? And I thought, why are we importing data from a payroll system into Business Central jobs? Why? It's like, oh, well, because we take the Excel spreadsheet and import it in the payroll system. And so it's already there, so you can just pull it down via API, right? It's like, well, why are you what is this process where you're taking Excel and importing in a payroll system? Oh, well, you see, at each job site, we manually collect time on pieces of paper. Then someone on each job site manually enters that time into an Excel spreadsheet. And then every week they email me these 20 plus Excel spreadsheets, and I combine them into one spreadsheet. And then I try to figure out how to upload that to our payroll company. And then you can download into Business Central. And I was like, whoa, can we just back up, big picture? Why aren't you using Business Central timesheets? Oh, no, we don't want to change our time collection system. That would cause too much disruption. So I'm now trying to have a conversation with the customer to convince them that adding further reliance upon this Excel file will further entrench this Excel file as a business process. And they're going to spend several $1,000s making that Excel file more important because they want to upload it to payroll. And instead of me pulling down from payroll, we would upload this data into BC. That's the compromise. Trying to roll that all the way back to do web-based time collection, whether it's BC timesheets or something else, just so that we don't have this huge pile of manual data aggregation and manual uploads and integrations on the back end. So just some zany conversations I've had with customers. I'm just second guessing myself. Am I misinterpreting what's going on here? But happy to hear your stories. And with that, I am getting my alarm to finish up for my call. So perfect timing. That was the crash, the very fast BC updates for December 2022. It is still early, so maybe I'll pull off another BC update before year end. But in any event, hope that was helpful and informative. Cheers.